Hi, and welcome into this week's episode of the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This week we have DeeDee More from More Than Grand is joining us to talk to us about the U.S. Surgeon General's report on parental mental health and well-being. This is an important topic for grandparents as well as parents, just to understand what's going on, what's happening in today's world. One of the things I know that some people might be saying is, well, parents' job's always been stressful. It's just always been that way. Well, and that's true, but we've got more and more young parents reporting that the stress that they're under is overwhelming from a day-to-day basis. And a high percent of those that are saying that say that they're under constant high levels of stress. So DeeDee and I are going to dive in, talk about what we as grandparents can do to help identify and help be a support for our young parents as they go through the struggles of raising a family, navigating careers, and navigating life in general. You are going to enjoy this conversation. And at the end of it, I hope you do go over and check out DeeDee's website at morethangrand.com. So without further ado, let's jump into this conversation. Hi, DeeDee. Welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I'm excited to have you back on and talk about this super important topic, which is mental health and the well-being of our parents, meaning our adult kids.
Greg, thank you so much for inviting me to have this conversation with you, because it is so important, and it's something that affects our lives as grandparents so much.
And just as a reminder, if DeeDee sounds familiar, we've had DeeDee on the Cool Grandpa Podcast before talking about her organization and her project, More Than Grand. And I will include a link into the show notes so folks can go back and find that episode really easy and learn more about More Than Grand. Now, what I'd love to do is the thing that really jumped out at us was, I think recently the Surgeon General had released an advisory on mental health and well-being of parents. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about when this was released and maybe what some of the key findings of the study were.
Absolutely. This was released at the end of August, and the United States Surgeon General releases something like this around public health issues that need urgent attention. So the state of parents' mental well-being is poor right now. They're under an incredible amount of stress, and it's something that we as a society need to address to try to help them. So some of the things he calls out are the cost of living, which is so burdensome. The cost of childcare and the ability to afford housing is so hard on so many families. They're really under an immense financial burden. Another one is social media and the effect that has both on children and on parents in the way that they view the world.
Yeah, those are huge. And a lot of these things are definitely ones that we didn't have to navigate so much as we were parents with our little kids. Certainly the rapid cost of goods over the last few years has been huge. And then also, we're in this generation of trying to figure out these devices. I mean, I think we were all little kids when there weren't really personal computers. There were these big boxes that were 386 that might have a little 3-inch screen and a keyboard that detached out of it. But you didn't have everybody within a business organization carrying around smartphones and laptops and were expected to be on 24/7. There was definitely a sense of, okay, work's at work and home's at home. And there were exceptions to that, but.
No, absolutely. And, parents now, they come home from work and they're still 100% on the job most of the time, in addition to being 100% on the job as parents. So that is a really hard thing to navigate. And it's something that employers really need to do a better job of helping parents helping all their employees, actually, by making a company policy that nobody emails after 6 p.m. or, whatever it may be.
I definitely think I saw some things in the Scandinavian news about some of the restrictions that are starting to go on in those countries where, depending on job level, depending on what type of work you do, that, after hours, you're not supposed to reach out to your employees, or at least not have an expectation that they're going to respond.
Right. Right.
And, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That the smartphone itself is a wonderful and amazing device, but it has also corroded a lot of the quality of life for parents and for children. But one of the things that's really hard as a parent today with social media is the comparison game. You see on social media all of the things that other parents are doing, and whether you consciously do it or not, there is this feeling that you're not keeping up, that you need to be packing more beautiful lunches and having really cool activities for your children all the time. When in reality, the peanut butter and jelly sandwich and, the box of crayons are tried and true ways to keep a child healthy and happy.
And do you find that the pressure's amped up more on the mom side versus the dad side?
100%. I mean, there is definitely a culture of moms trying to, I don't want to say outdo each other, because that's not a fair word, but there is this pressure to keep up and to keep doing the things that everyone else is doing. And now, it used to just be what you heard on the schoolyard, what you saw in your neighborhood. And now you're seeing people all over the world and comparing yourself to them, which is not helpful.
No. And the thing that's interesting to me, at least watching some of the social media, is some of the postings that you see from dads typically tend to be funny in terms of like, hey, I was told to babysit the kids or watch the kids at home, and they duct tape them to a wall or something like that. And dads just kind of laugh that off. But I see, especially now that I've got daughter-in-laws, how much gets posted out there, like, oh, here's the perfect summertime lunch, and there's a nice linen tablecloth. And these are for 4-year-olds.
Right. And I think that's, another thing that has come from social media and, the internet in general, is that there is a right way to do things, that there's a right way and a wrong way. Your right way may be different from somebody else's, we all know that. But the idea that there is a way you have to do, whether it be, getting your child to sleep at night or introducing foods to them, all these things. There's so much out there that parents feel like they've got to do it right, or there's going to be some major repercussion.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And, we've talked a little bit about some of these differences and some of the stresses that parents are feeling, but do you have, or can you recall some of the different stresses that today's parents have that maybe older Gen X and baby boomers weren't experiencing?
Well, I mean, I think one of them is definitely financial. I mean, if we knew that if we worked hard, we would someday probably be able to buy a house, or at least get a really nice apartment that we wanted. If we had 2 incomes, there was no problem affording childcare and extracurriculars. And now that's not true. I mean, a 2-income family can still be struggling mightily to afford childcare if they can't even find it. A house is out of reach for most young couples these days. It's in most parts of the country, obviously not everywhere, but it is increasingly hard to afford the things that we took for granted as being achievable if we just worked hard. So I think that is a big one. Of course, we've talked about social media, but I don't think we can emphasize that enough, because it has completely changed the landscape of parenting. I know I have 4 kids, and my first 2 were born in the 80s, and the second 2 were born in the 90s. And by the 90s, the internet was in our house, and I joined a online group for moms who were expecting babies the same month as I was, before my 3rd child was born. That was the first time that I was exposed to a lot of people's opinions on how to do things, right? With my first 2 kids, I parented them the way that I had seen parenting done, either for or against what had happened, right? I followed my instincts a lot, because we had a limited amount of advice, our parents, our pediatrician, a couple of books. And other than that, we trusted ourselves a little bit more. With the second 2, here I was with this group of, 250 women from all over the world, and men. There were a few dads in there too, giving advice, with very very strong opinions about what was right and what was wrong in raising children. And there was a lot more to sort through. For me, I was, since I'd already had 2 kids, I was pretty confident in my abilities as a parent. But what I learned from that is that there are lots of ways to be a good parent, right? And just because I didn't think that, attachment, sleeping with my child until they were 4 was the best thing for my family, didn't mean that it was wrong, right? But now parents have so much coming at them all the time that they don't have any time to trust their instincts. There is so much being told to them about how to do this, watching what other people are doing. These experts in this and that and the other thing are all right there in their hand, and they don't get that chance to trust themselves. And that being able to trust your instincts is what gives you confidence as a parent. So because they can't ever gain that confidence, they're more anxious. And the anxiety is off the charts for parents today.
It reminds me too, I think it was probably 15 years ago or something. You couldn't hardly go into a grocery store without having a bunch of little kids with Nerf helmets on, like newborns that had those things on. And there's probably some kids that needed that, but it couldn't have been the numbers that I was seeing. And I'm sure somewhere was like, if you don't do this, this means that you don't love your kids. That's the part of it that seems so detrimental. It's not a case of like, oh, well, DeeDee wants to do this with her children, and this is how she's doing this. And Greg's going to let the little kid cry himself to sleep and not go in and comfort them or whatever. And it's kind of like, okay, well, DeeDee's doing that. Greg's doing this. Okay, that, to each their own. The kids will be fine. They'll be fine. But then the messaging comes, well, if you don't do it this way, you don't love your kids.
Right.
You're a bad mom. And, DFACS, Children Protective Services, is going to be showing up in it.
Right.
I mean, geez, I feel bad for these 23, 24-year-old first-time moms and younger moms. And I mean, it's just weird. And so it does go, it feeds into this.
Yeah, absolutely. And the anxiety is a big issue. It's the Surgeon General shows that the levels of anxiety right now in parents is extremely high, much higher than it has been in previous generations. They're worried about, first of all, whether they're doing a good job or not, but they're also worried about the state of the world. I mean, they're worried about the big things like global warming and that are really hard for any one of us to do anything about. They're worried about school shootings. They're worried about all those other things they're seeing on the news that seem so frightening. Well, they are frightening, but I think that because of the 24-hour news cycle and the social media, those things like school shootings or child abductions seem much more possible than they really are. But that just, whether it's logical or not, causes that anxiety.
For sure. And, you can't tell somebody like, don't be afraid of this, because they're
Right.
going to be afraid. A fear is a fear. And you can definitely, there's all sorts of ways counselors and people can help. If you're afraid of an elevator, there's desensitization, step on, step off. It's hard when it's something global warming, war in Europe.
Right.
How do you desensitize yourself to a possible war in Europe?
You can't. No. You'd have to just turn off the TV, put down the smartphone, and bury your head in the sand to totally avoid those things. That's not possible, but it's something that we as grandparents can help out with, and the way we can help is by not adding to parents' anxiety, making sure that we help boost their confidence as parents, because that will help them immensely, and doing what we can to take the burden off of them, helping out financially if we're at all able, helping with childcare if we're able. Those are some of the things we can do.
How do you advise grandparents to step in and do some of these things? Because sometimes well-meaning grandparents can definitely be like, we're coming in, we'll babysit the kids, we're doing this, here's K for private preschool, but here's all the strings attached to it, and here's everything else that goes on with it. How do you help people balance that helping with either time or resources without I don't know, making the kids feel even worse about themselves.
Right. That's such a good point, Greg. And it comes down to communication and attitude. So the best thing to do is to have a conversation. Come to your kids and say, "Hey, being a parent today is hard. How can we help? And here are some of the things that we might be able to do to help you. Would any of these be helpful? Could we, take the kids on weekends so you guys can really get a good rest? Can we, be in charge of picking up from school on a regular basis? Can we, we don't live nearby, so can we help you out financially a little bit so that you can hire a housekeeper or pay for an extra hour of childcare?" And then grandparents, you have got to understand that once you do something like that, there is nothing that you get in return except a better relationship with your kids and your grandkids. Those strings, we'll do this for you, but then you have to come visit us for a week every summer, and, we get to take, or you have to do the, we'll take the kids on Sundays, but we're taking them to church with us, even though you don't want them to go to church. You can't use your generosity to try to manage what the kids are doing.
That's great advice, because I think sometimes when we hear of the estrangements, when we hear of these things that go on, it's in being in an estranged relationship doesn't come stress-free. Whether you're the person that's cutting off access to grandchildren or yourself from in-laws or your parents, there's stress on both sides in that whole equation. So to everything we talked about, the stressing parents out, having that strained relationship is just another big brick in that wall.
Absolutely. And, it stresses them out when they ask us to do something and we don't take them seriously. When they say, "Please, no sugar after 6 p.m." And we think one cookie's not going to, that's stressful for them. So let's do what we can to make life easier for them, to reduce the stress that we can. So anything that we personally can do to not add to parents' stress is a huge gift to them.
And I love the idea of making sure that you follow kind of their rules and their guidelines. I think traditionally we've seen, through TV and everything else, is that once the kids get to grandma and grandpa's house, it's just a completely different set of rules and diet and everything else. And, that's not a good thing, especially when the moms are saying, "Hey, we're trying to keep sugar intake lower. We're trying to do these things." They actually do need to go to bed at 7:30 or 8 o'clock,
Right.
whatever that is.
Yeah. And grandparents are, it's hard on grandparents because the messages that we get from social media and society are spoil the grandkids, right? Ignore the parents' rules. And so we're getting really bad messages from out there, and we have to rein that back and follow our hearts and listen to parents and learn all the ways you can be an amazing grandparent without overindulging and spoiling your grandkids.
Oh, yeah, for sure. When I was preparing for this, something that came to mind, I remember as we were raising our kids in the 90s and into the 2000s, a conversation that was being had was, were we doing too much for the kids? Were we not letting them experience hardship? Were we not letting them experience making hard decisions? Because to me, Generation X and that tail end of the baby boomers, we were the original helicopter parents. We were the ones that were hovering around everywhere. I mean, my mom loved me, don't get me wrong, but during the summertime from sun up until sometime after sundown, she had no idea where I was, what I was doing. I could be at the lake or friends or whatever. And where I'm going with this is, have we maybe did a disservice to the young parents today by being maybe too involved? And there's no way to put the genie back in the bottle, but I'm interested in your opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The book, The Anxious Generation, actually talks about this a lot, about how we have taken risk out of childhood and how important risk is to a child's development, to be able to engage in risky play, to be able to do things that are a little, anything from climbing a tree and falling out of it. That is really good for a kid's brain. when they aren't exposed to those risks, when they aren't given the responsibility of making those decisions at a young age, they grow up more anxious. And that is something that's happened. That is one reason for the anxiousness of today's parents, because they were not allowed to fail. They were not allowed to move through the world in a way that would keep themselves safe, right? So they didn't build that confidence that they could do hard things. And so that's something that's definitely a problem. And unfortunately, parents today are shielding their children even more than the helicopter parents of the 90s and early 2000s did. And, not even letting them go outside and play because of perceived risks that aren't actually even there. I mean, it's safer for kids out in the world. The rate of child abduction is so low, it's almost non-existent. Child abductions do not happen from strangers. It's usually, a non-custodial parent. And so, we're keeping kids from experiencing the things that they should be experiencing. I know I am so grateful because my son and his family have moved into a neighborhood that is so family friendly and so full of kids, and their school, a quarter of a mile away. And my second grade grandson and kindergarten granddaughter walked to school together last year, just with a group of kids. Mom sent them out the door and off they went down the hill. So it can happen. It's just so sad that so few kids get that experience.
Well, and I think it also goes back to, if you do try to do some of these things, I think there was a big case in Maryland or something that made the big news for a while. Oh my gosh, a mom let her two kids go like a block away to the public park and play by themselves.
Right.
And it was like, horrible mom, killed the mom, stoned the mom, and it's like.
Exactly. There have been parents that have been charged with child neglect for letting their kids walk to school or go out and play, which is why I'm so glad that my son's neighborhood is, everyone's on board with the idea that kids should be out there on their own. But yes, it is a societal problem as well. I mean, there are rules in some towns that children under 16 can't be left alone. That's ridiculous. My son was babysitting his little sisters when he was 11, right?
Yep. Same thing. Mom's got to run up to the grocery store. I'll be back in about 30 minutes,
Yeah, so it's a bigger problem than just parents. It's a societal issue and one that's going to take a big shift to undo.
So how do we as grandparents go about helping to coach and talk about some of this with especially the moms and the dads? I mean, dads get part of this as well. You can't go, I can't imagine going into my son's home, talking to my daughter-in-law and saying, you should let the 6-year-old walk himself to school or something.
No, yeah, absolutely. That is not something we can do. What we can do though is, for example, I've already mentioned the book, The Anxious Generation. I recently read it, which is one reason it's so top of mind, but I think every grandparent and every parent should read that. So if you're a grandparent, get that book, read that book, and then recommend it to parents. That's one thing to help them understand some of the issues that are going on. Another thing that we can do as grandparents is to help change the attitudes in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in our legislation. We can be advocating for policies that support parents. We don't have to just think about our family. We can think on a much bigger scale and really help with programs and policies that support parents and children. So, volunteer in your neighborhood to help with programs that provide free after-school care. Support organizations that provide these things. And when there are things on the ballot that talk about programs for parents and children, learn about them, advocate for them, talk to your lawmakers about them, and really do what you can to change things in society. A lot of us grandparents have time on our hands. We've got some clout because of our age with lawmakers, and we can make changes.
I love that. And that goes right to what the advisory was that came out from the Surgeon General. That was one of, I think, about 7 different calls to action that were recommended. And just to follow in on that, my experience with some of the volunteer groups that I've been associated with, especially reading groups. And these have been typically reading groups where English is a second language to kids, and the programs are to help get kids up to grade level. The thing that everybody wanted was more grandfathers, more males in there for that help, because some of those kids, they don't get enough time with dad. Dad's out making money. He's doing what he's doing, which is all well and good. And that's what, dads are supposed to be doing. But then the kids also want some of that male time, that relationship there. And it's not saying that they've got too much time with mom. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying
No.
that grandfathers especially should be part of this, because I think grandmas do an awesome job of rallying the troops and getting out the vote and, going to the board meetings. I think grandfathers tend to hang back a little bit. And I encourage grandfathers to get involved, especially in the I'm going to say this wrong, advancing policies within, community, state, and national levels.
Absolutely. And I think that, as much as we tend to think about helping our grandchildren, one of the best things we can do is helping to change the world so that it's a better place for them to grow up in.
What are some of the other calls to action that were mentioned in that advisory on mental health and well-being for parents?
Another one is to employers, so if you're still in the workforce, especially if you happen to be an employer as a grandparent, what are your company policies around for parents? How much leave do you give them? How understanding are you of the stress that they're under? Those are things that anybody can do. And especially for grandparents, that's another way that we can help make it a better world for all of the kids out there. So be aware of those. If you're not an employer, but you work for a company still, if you're not retired, talk to your company, advocate for parents on their behalf. Don't put all the burden of making life better for parents on the parents. That's something else we can do.
I think, too, we've got to wave the flag a little bit if we're in need. If you're a mom or a dad that has something in need, sometimes you might be surprised because typically the manager above you has been a mom or a dad. And you might be surprised about some of the things that they can do, and they can bend stuff a certain way, and they can. So ask. It doesn't hurt, even if you think like it's going to be a no. I always tell parents and tell people, make the ask. You might be surprised what the organization might do for you.
Absolutely.
So what I want to do, too, is talk a little bit more about how do we start to really talk about this challenge of mental health with parents amongst our peers, amongst people in the community, even our churches. I think sometimes church and civic organizations and things, they've got a lot on their plate that they're trying to do. But how do we start to bubble this conversation up so there's a little bit more awareness?
That's such a good question. And one thing that we need to recognize, and I see this out there a lot, is that mental health, when we were parents, saying that you were suffering a mental health problem, there was a stigma attached to that. Insurance didn't cover mental health coverage, and we didn't want to say that we were struggling with depression. Society frowned upon that. Anxiety, any of those things. We just didn't want to bring that up. Mental health is something that today's parents are very open about. There's now a good coverage on most insurance plans for mental health care. And it's something that we as a generation need to recognize. It's not that parents, not necessarily that they're having more mental health problems now. It's that we as a society are accepting that that is something that we can talk about and something that we should address as a society. Helping organizations understand that this is something we need to prioritize, whether we have, as you said, your church or another community organization. Think about ways to bring that conversation up and talk about where parents might be able to get help. I think that's a great place to start.
I don't think it can do anything but help in terms of bringing this up and making it part of the conversation. One of the things I wanted to talk about too, and it goes along with what we're just talking about here, is that I know looking at the Surgeon General survey, one item that jumped out to me is approximately 77% of single parents experience loneliness compared to 55% of non-parents. Of that, 65% of parents. So I'm going to say parents would be couples, singles, or single mom, single dad. It's such a huge thing. And I think we all have felt this as young parents, right? You have little kids, all of a sudden going out Friday night is not something that you're going to experience. So your group of friends and that dynamic that you have changes. But what's shocking is how large a percent that is in that loneliness.
Absolutely. And that's something that social media exacerbates because it looks like nobody else is lonely. And we tend to do most of our socializing through our phones rather than in person. Grandparents can help with this a lot by just checking in, by sending a text that says, "Hey, would you have time to talk later? Could we meet for coffee?" Or even just, "How are you doing today?" Instead of making all of the conversations about the kids, make the conversations about the parents instead.
I love that. Do the check-ins and do the socials and go to dinner, meet for breakfast, whatever. But I think it's important for us to realize too that we're not substitutes for a network of peers.
Right.
And
absolutely. Yeah. And so that's the other thing you do. You say, "Hey, when we're in town, can we watch the kids one night so you guys can go out?" Help them find those connections.
And there's a lot of times too that I think one thing that we can do as older parents and grandparents is we may have some more time on our hands that we can do a little bit of research. Hey, what are the meetup groups in this particular town that might be having the same interest as our sons or daughters?
Right.
And
exactly. Yeah. So we can definitely, do that. Help them find mom's day out group in the area or other things, and just talk to them about our own experiences as a young parent and how much we understand how isolating it can be and what we did to find a group of people that could support us.
I love that. One of the things when you put your blog out that I did was a solo episode thinking about this in terms of grandfathers, and one of the things I did say in that I remembered was you can sympathize and empathize with what your sons and daughters are going through, but don't get into the comparison.
Right. And it's human nature to try to share our own experiences, but there's a way to do it that's helpful and a way to do it that is not. So, if you need a little practice with how to do it helpfully, then there's some reading you can do and some practicing on thinking through what you're saying.
Now, DeeDee, I've had you on for a little while. Is there anything else about this Surgeon General advisory or some of the takeaways that you've learned that you'd like to address that maybe I haven't asked about?
Well, I think one thing that we can talk about is, with the holidays coming up, this is a super, super, super stressful time for parents. So what are we doing to help them to avoid that stress, right? What are we doing to make visits easier if they're coming to visit us? What are we doing to make visits easier if we're going to visit them? What are we doing to minimize the number of demands on their time that we are making because they are having demands from everywhere? How can we help with that last week of school before they get out for Christmas vacation? There's so many things at the holidays that are so incredibly stressful, and grandparents really should examine what they can do to make things easier.
End of the year is tough all the way around. I mean, it is supposed to be family and there's different holidays and there's all these things going on. But we also have to remember too, this is like end of the quarter, end of the year. From a business perspective, there's a lot that's trying to go on and a lot of pressures there, as well as holiday recitals and, dinners and everything else. So yeah, as older parents, anything we can do to kind of lift that burden a little bit is definitely going to reduce that stress.
Completely.
Now, I would like you just to mention a little bit about the new grandparent essentials and maybe talk a little bit about More Than Grand as we wrap things up.
Well, I know I've been on before and talked about new grandparent essentials, but I started More Than Grand to help new grandparents learn the things they need to know to really support parents so they can have a wonderful relationship with their grandchildren. New Grandparent Essentials contains everything that parents want new grandparents to know. So it talks about modern baby care and safety standards. It talks about current parenting trends. There's a whole section on how to be a good partner to parents. It's really kind of a grandparenting class in a PDF, and it's really very helpful for new grandparents and older ones. I've had veteran grandparents who have taken it and come back and said, "Oh my gosh, I did not realize how many things I was doing to make life harder for my kids. And since I've taken this and had some of these conversations, it's totally changed the dynamic." So it's a great tool for new grandparents and ones that are a few years into the game as well. Even if you think you're doing a great job, there is probably something that you are doing that really bothers parents, and they're not going to tell you about it.
No. And I can tell you, for the most part, grandpas are going to be oblivious to any kind of subtleties or signals. Generally, we need a 2x4 upside the head before we know what's going on.
Yeah, so this is a great thing, and I always love it when I see that a grandfather has bought it, because it's really, it shows such a dedication to family, not just to your role as a grandparent, but it shows such a dedication to your family when you're willing to invest a little time and money to get better at what you're doing.
And where can people find this?
They can get it on my website, which is morethangrand.com. And in addition to that, they'll find all sorts of other resources that are, free ones and paid ones. I've got a great blog with a ton of information. Right now, I've got a holiday guide for grandparents that it's Grandparents' Guide to Happy Holidays, which really goes over all of the hot spots of holidays and how to navigate them. So, there's a lot there. Morethangrand.com.
And I'll be sure to put a link to that into the show notes as well, so that we'll make it easy for folks that are out running errands. DeeDee, this has just been a blast talking to you about this really important subject. It's been fun kind of comparing notes and takeaways that we have on this. Thank you again for making time to come on to the Cool Grandpa podcast. And hopefully we can direct some granddads over there to get that new grandparent essentials.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Greg.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with DeeDee as much as I did. It was fantastic getting her insights on the Surgeon General's report on parental mental health and well-being. If you want to check out the blog that DeeDee and I were referencing, please go over to morethangrand.com and you can check it out there. I've also got a direct link to that blog in the show notes as well, so you can check it out there and go straight to the blog. Be sure to also spend a little bit of time over at More Than Grand. DeeDee has got some great resources for new grandparents and new parents so that they can get their relationships off on the best footing possible. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you have a fantastic holiday season and a very Merry Christmas. And until next time, stay cool.